That's a Cresta 2, one of the prime Soviet warships in the 1970s and 80s, covered in radars and weapons. A very impressive warship. Taxiing forward, mandatory signals. And you'll note that there is a pretty strong wind. There he is, leaning into it. Onto the catapult. Tensioned up into the launch position. They check the strop, give the flight deck officer the thumbs up. He raises his green flag. In a second, he'll look to his right. Nobody there. Down goes the flag. Short pause. 0 to 113, 145 feet. Notice how close all these people are to the launching aircraft. Now we're just going to see some aircraft firing 2-inch rocket projectiles at the splash target. You wouldn't want to use 2-inch rockets to try and sink a Cresta 2, but nevertheless, it's quite a good visual display. It was probably the most challenging and most exciting flying that I think I'd ever done in my time in the service. Happy to take any questions.
You've got the microphone.
Right, I can get rid of this, can't I?
I'll tell you if we get any.
So if anyone has any questions for Tom, please put your hand up or speak away.
No? Oh, Rick's put his hand up.
Yeah, So
Yeah, Rick, can you hear me?
I can, Tom. Lovely. Thanks for the presentation. Really enjoyed it. I mean, the first thing I'll say is just a comment. I was very interested in your comment about your radar sort of being sort of similar to the Lightning's in some way. And you talked about a 250-mile range. All I remember when I was flying the Lightning, we had about a maximum of about 25, 30-mile range, but that's another thing. But my questions tonight are, one, and I might have missed it. I've got three short ones, in fact. Night landings. As I say, I might have missed it. What were your experiences of night landings?
Horrible. Horrible. Nobody.
I'll just finish these before you answer them. That was the first question. The second question was, and in fact, I always remember when I was based at RAF Lucas flying Phantoms in those days, and I had the privilege of going. We had 892 Phantom Squadron on at Lucas with us, and I went on board at Ark Royal, and the weather was absolutely, excuse ladies and gents, crap. But I was very impressed by the way the Navy launched their fleet of Phantoms and Buccaneers in pea soup fog, quite frankly. You know, basically it was if they didn't get back in on their first approach, they were going to divert to the shore. So I'd be very interested in your words about dealing with emergencies and shore diversions. And the third thing was, what was life like in the wardroom? I remember a few times I'd been sort of on board Navy ships in the wardroom. It's been an exceptionally lively place. But I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say about your time in those days.
Well, I'll start with the last question. Life in the wardroom was, yes, robust is probably the best way to describe it. You got a bunch of fighter pilots, strike attack pilots, Gannet pilots, helicopter pilots. There were no women there at all. The bar would open at 5 o'clock every evening. If you weren't night flying or anything, there was nothing else to do but go to the bar. And as you can imagine, there were some fairly robust events there. One quick one, we also used to get invited off to the chief petty officers' messes. And I remember the boss saying, just be very careful before you go there because they'll give you rum. They're not supposed to store rum. They're supposed to drink it when they're given it. But you'll get this stuff. And so we all wandered up there. Bear in mind, we were only wearing shorts and flip-flops, etc. Uniform dress while we were working was pretty casual. And on top of that, during the sort of nighttime, the troops used to take the banisters off the companionways to clean them, leaving the steel uprights. And one of our lot went home early and we found him. He'd slipped on the companionway and the steel vertical that holds the banister up had gone up one trouser leg, missed the vital parts, had come out of his pocket. And he was swinging around there. He was a very happy chap, but he couldn't get off. And that showed you the sort of dramas that happened. Going to your next question, yes, diversion and non-diversion flying. In some respects, non-diversion flying was easier than diversion flying, because when you came back on board, or you were planning to come back on board, the margins between your max hook-on weight and your diversion fuel were minimal. You probably had 1 or 2 goes at getting on board if you were lucky, and then you had to go and divert. So you had this constant problem. Am I going to get on board? Is the deck going to be foul? If I'm waved off for some reason or other, I've got to divert. And it was always a pain being diverted because you then had to organize getting back on board again. It was actually easier to fly non-diversion because if things were going wrong, you could just carry on till the fuel ran out. We never actually had an incident of anybody running out of fuel, but everybody, funnily enough, preferred non-diversion flying. For that very reason, it was more flexible. It really was a pain flying for diversion. And bear in mind, once you're diverted, how do you get the bloody airplane started again? We didn't have an internal starter. We needed it paloosed. And we either had to get someone to bring one out to us or hope that the airfield had some form of jet starter, which a lot of places didn't have in those days. So for us, non-diversion flying was better. Bear in mind that every launch was an instrument procedure. So you could launch in dreadful weather because it was just like launching any other time. You did it on instruments because that's what you were told to do. You only looked out and got going VFR once you cleaned the airplane up. And finally, night flying. None of us liked night flying. You never did a visual circuit at night. It was considered that you couldn't cope with a visual circuit at night because you didn't have enough time to absorb all the information. The lighting, you had red lights down the center line of the ship, and when they got to the stern, they went vertically down into what was known as the donkey's plonk. And this gave you a very powerful indication of whether you were left or right. And of course, you only need to stray off ever so slightly, and you got this very powerful image. The rest of the deck was floodlit in relatively low intensity lighting, white lighting. And of course, all around the ship was as dark as anything, nothing, no other lights apart from the projector sight. So recoveries to the ship at night, irrespective of the weather conditions, were always for an instrument approach. Bear in mind, we didn't have a PAR type approach or an ILS because the ship could pitch up and down, and what would that do to the glide slope? So it was always a azimuth only approach. And I well remember the talk down. You'd get the talk down and you would never look up until you got the call, you're approaching 1 mile, look up for the sight. And you looked up for the sight and you had about, I don't know, 40, 45 seconds or so to assimilate the picture and get on board. And none of us enjoyed it at all. Night flying, whether it was Buccaneer or Sea Vixen, was always a difficult, stressful time. And hopefully the wardroom bar would still be open when you got back down there. And that's when the G&Ts and the horses' necks need to be consumed in large numbers following a safe trap at night.
Thanks, Tom. Good answers.
Anything else? No?
Nobody else. You've got a few thank yous on the message chat.
Where do I see that?
So if we mute you, then Tom Terry's going to say a few words.
Yeah, I'll press them.
There you go.
Well, Tom, you've really given us a tour de force this evening, a very exciting presentation. And all of you, if Tom's whetted your appetite for more, then there's 3 books out there. Tom's written a terrific book called A Passion for Flying, which is all about the Buccaneer and really expands on what he's told us about this evening. Needless to say, that's on my bookshelf, as is his second book, which is called Flying in Father's Footsteps. Tom's father was an RAF pilot as well, very distinguished pilot too. And thirdly, and most recently, Tom has co-authored a book with Rick Peacock Edwards, who asked the first question, which is called Nat Boys. That too is a terrific read. And if that's not enough, there's another book called Buccaneer Boys, to which Tom made a wonderful contribution. The Buccaneer really was a fabulous aircraft. I was privileged enough to be the engineering support authority for the Buccaneer in its twilight years. They gave me a flight in it, and I agree with Tom, sitting in the back seat isn't very comfortable. In my particular case, I felt very unwell. It was a terrific aeroplane, the banana bomber, and it was replaced by the Tornado GR2 aircraft. And most Buccaneer pilots and aircrew will tell you that the Buccaneer carried more bombs, flew faster, and went further than the Tornado. There was not a dry eye in the house when the Buccaneer was retired. Tom, you've given us a fabulous insight into the Buccaneer, a wonderful overview of carrier operations, and I can't thank you enough from all of us for sparing your time to come to the Cambridge Aero Club this evening, to give us an absolutely fabulous talk. Thank you, Tom.